The market on the colony station was always full of noise. Merchants called out the names of their goods, small machines beeped as they counted credits, and families moved from one stall to another carrying bags of food and supplies. The lights above were bright, but they never felt warm. Everything inside the station was metal and glass, and no one had time to stop and rest. Myra walked slowly down one of the long aisles with her son, Ryan, at her side. She carried a small basket, and every step she took was heavy. Her eyes scanned the shelves. Packages of dried grain, fruit sealed in clear wrapping, and containers of water lined the racks. Each item had a glowing price tag. Myra counted the credits in her small handheld device again and again, hoping the numbers would somehow change. They never did. Ryan tugged gently at her sleeve. His voice was soft but filled with hope. "Mama, can we get the fruit this time?" Myra looked at the container he was pointing to. Inside were bright yellow pieces of fruit from a far planet. They looked sweet and full of life. She wanted to say yes, but she shook her head. "Not today, Ryan. Maybe later." The boy lowered his hand. His small face fell, but he did not argue. He had learned that his mother's answer always came with a reason, even when she did not say it aloud. Myra placed a bag of grain in the basket and added a small carton of milk. She paused, hesitated, then returned the milk to the shelf. It cost too much. They reached the end of the aisle, and Myra checked her device again. She whispered the total under her breath, then sighed. The numbers showed less than what she needed. Still, she carried the basket to the checkout counter, trying to stay strong for her son. The cashier stood behind the counter, scanning items for another customer. He was a quiet man named Tomasz, with steady eyes and a calm face. He moved with simple care, as if he respected every person who came to him. When the customer left, Myra stepped forward. She placed the basket gently on the counter. Tomasz scanned the grain, the fruit she finally decided to risk taking, and a small piece of bread. The machine beeped after each item, and the glowing total rose on the screen. Myra's heart sank as she saw the number. It was too high. Her hands trembled as she opened her device. She tried to pay, but the machine gave a sharp sound of rejection. Insufficient credits. Myra's cheeks burned with shame. Other shoppers in line shifted impatiently. Some looked away, pretending not to notice. Others frowned at the delay. Ryan's eyes turned toward the bread. He whispered so softly that only Myra could hear. "It's okay, Mama. We don't need it." Myra swallowed hard. She nodded, then reached out with a shaking hand. She picked up the bread and set it aside. The total dropped, but still the credits were not enough. She removed the fruit next, her son's favorite. The glowing yellow pieces seemed to fade as they left the counter. Her heart grew heavier. Piece by piece, she started to return items, as if she was slowly undoing the hope she had placed in the basket. She felt the eyes of others on her back. To them, she was just another struggling woman. But to her son, she wanted to be strong. Still, her strength was breaking. Tomasz had been silent, but his eyes never left the scene. He saw the boy's small hands clutching the edge of the counter. He saw Myra's tired face, her movements full of quiet defeat. He scanned the last remaining item, the grain, and looked at the total again. Myra took a deep breath. She was about to return the grain too, leaving with nothing but her son's hand in hers. Before she could, Tomasz pressed a button on his side of the counter. The machine beeped, then displayed a message. "Payment accepted." Myra froze. She looked at her device, then at the screen. She had not paid. She turned her gaze to Tomasz. He gave her a small nod. "It's covered," he said quietly, almost like he was afraid to make a scene. Myra's lips parted, but no words came. Her son's eyes widened, full of wonder and relief. He reached for the bread and fruit that were already packed back into the bag by the machine. Myra found her voice at last, soft and trembling. "I cannot let you do this. It is too much." Tomasz shook his head. "It is not too much. Take it. Feed your boy." For a moment, Myra could only stand there. She felt the weight of weeks, months of struggle, and now this simple act felt like a crack of light in the endless gray of her life. Her throat tightened. She whispered, "Thank you." Other shoppers who had been watching now whispered to each other. Some looked surprised, others confused. To them, it was strange. In their worlds, no one gave without expecting something in return. Yet this human cashier had done so with no hesitation. Myra picked up the bag and held Ryan's hand tightly. She bowed her head slightly before stepping away. As they walked, Ryan looked up at her with bright eyes. "Mama, we can eat today." She smiled faintly, though tears touched the corners of her eyes. "Yes, Ryan. We can." Behind them, Tomasz returned to his work as if nothing unusual had happened. He scanned the next customer's items with the same calm face. But inside the market, a quiet ripple had begun. People spoke in low tones about the human cashier who gave when he had little. The act seemed small, yet in that moment, it planted a story that would spread far beyond the marketplace. And Myra, holding her son close, knew she would never forget the kindness of a stranger who refused to let them go hungry. The next morning, the market was as busy as ever. Voices rose and fell in constant rhythm. The smell of baked bread mixed with the sharp scent of metal from nearby repair shops. Vendors shouted about their goods, while customers bargained over every credit. The colony station never slowed, for survival allowed no pause. Myra and Ryan walked past the stalls with their single bag of food. The boy held the fruit carefully in his small hands as if it were treasure. Myra kept glancing at him. His face was brighter, his steps quicker. That small kindness from yesterday had given him a spark she had not seen in a long time. Myra remembered the moment clearly. The way the cashier had pressed the button. The way he had spoken so quietly. She still did not understand why he had helped. In this colony, kindness was rare. Everyone lived with just enough for themselves. Yet Tomasz had given away his own credits without hesitation. That same morning, Tomasz returned to his post at the counter. He had not thought much about what he had done. To him, it was simple. He had seen a mother and her child in need. He had chosen to act. He did not expect thanks, nor did he seek attention. But whispers were already moving through the market. Two merchants stood near the bread stall, talking in low voices. "Did you hear what the human cashier did?" one asked. The other snorted. "Yes. Foolish. Giving away his own credits for someone else. That is no way to survive." "But still," the first said, "it is unusual. No one else would do that." They both glanced toward the checkout counter, where Tomasz stood scanning items for a customer. His face was calm, almost unreadable, as he worked. To the merchants, he seemed ordinary. Yet they kept whispering, for ordinary beings did not act as he had. Later that day, Myra found herself back in the market. She had debated coming, but something inside her told her she needed to speak. With Ryan at her side, she stepped into the line for Tamash's counter. When her turn came, she placed a small loaf of bread on the scanner. Tamash looked up, his steady eyes meeting hers. He gave a nod of greeting. "Back again?" he asked in his quiet way. Myra lowered her gaze. "I came to thank you again. I did not say enough yesterday. You gave more than food. You gave hope." Tamash paused for a moment, then continued scanning the bread. "It was nothing. You needed it? That is enough reason." Myra shook her head. "It was not nothing. People do not give like that. At least, not here." Ryan tugged at her hand and smiled shyly at Tamash. "Mama says you are kind." For the first time, Tamash's lips curved into a faint smile. "Kindness should not be rare, little one." The words settled deep in Myra's heart. She had grown used to struggle, used to silence, used to hiding her pain. But this man spoke as if kindness were simple, natural, expected. It felt almost like a forgotten truth. Behind them, other customers listened. Some frowned, muttering about wasted credits. Others tilted their heads, wondering if perhaps kindness held some hidden strength. The whispers grew again. That evening, as the market quieted, Tamash finished his shift. He counted the small pile of credits left for his own use. It was less than before, but he did not regret it. As he left the market, he walked past the same merchants who had spoken earlier. They looked at him with curiosity. One called out, "Why did you do it? Why give what you need for yourself?" Tamash stopped, turning his head slightly. His answer was simple. Because they needed it more. Then he walked on, leaving the merchants in silence. In her small living space, Myra prepared the bread for dinner. Ryan sat on the floor, watching eagerly. The room was plain, with thin walls and a dim light, but tonight it felt warmer. As they ate, Myra thought about Tamash again. She had met many people since arriving at the colony, but none had ever shown such quiet strength. She wondered who he was, where he came from, and why he chose to live as a cashier when his heart seemed larger than the role. The next day brought the same routine. Myra worked at the repair shop, Ryan attended lessons for young children, and Tamash returned to the counter. But the whispers did not fade. More and more people began to talk. Some spoke with admiration, others with disbelief. Aliens who had lived on the colony for years found it strange that a human would act without gain. They were used to trade, to exchange, to bargains. They were not used to giving freely. One elder alien, with gray ridges across his brow, watched Tamash carefully. He spoke to his companions. "Humans are curious creatures. They value more than survival. They place worth in things unseen." The companions shook their heads. "Such ways are weak. In times of shortage, only the strong survive." The elder smiled faintly. "Perhaps strength has many forms." And so, while Myra tried to keep her life steady, she did not realize that her small moment at the counter had begun to stir thoughts in many hearts. What had felt like shame and defeat to her had become the spark of a quiet story spreading across the colony. For Tamash, the choice had been simple. Yet for the colony, the meaning was not simple at all. Each whisper carried the question further: why would a human give away his own survival for another? Myra held Ryan close as they lay down to rest that night. The boy's soft breathing filled the room. She thought again of Tamash's words. Kindness should not be rare. She closed her eyes and wished that maybe, just maybe, the colony would begin to see the truth in those words. And somewhere in the crowded station, Tomasz walked home through the dim corridors, unaware that his quiet choice had already begun to change more than one life. The marketplace of the colony had always been full of sound, but now a new sound was added to the usual noise of bargaining and trade. It was the sound of whispers. Everywhere people gathered, voices spoke softly about the same thing. They spoke of the human cashier who had given away his credits for a mother and her child. At first, it was only the merchants who had seen it. Then they told their friends, and their friends told others. Soon the story reached even those who never visited the market. On the colony station, news traveled faster than ships, carried not by machines but by mouths eager to speak. Some called the act foolish. A tall trader with scaled skin scoffed as he set up his stall. Humans waste their strength. A man who gives away food when he barely has enough for himself will not survive long. Another merchant disagreed. She folded her arms and shook her head. Perhaps it is not weakness. Perhaps it is something we do not understand. Who else here would give like that? The tall trader laughed. Only a fool. But the story did not stop. It grew. In a small repair shop, two workers spoke over the sound of humming tools. "Did you hear about the cashier?" one asked. "Yes," the other replied. "I heard he paid for the food of a woman he did not even know." "And her son," the first added. "Imagine that. No blood tie. No contract. Nothing binding. And yet he gave." The worker frowned. "It makes no sense. But still, I cannot stop thinking about it." While the colony debated, Myra tried to live quietly. She wanted no attention. She only wanted her son to be safe, to have food in his belly and a roof above his head. But when she walked through the market, she felt eyes following her. Some looked with pity, others with curiosity, and a few with quiet respect. One afternoon, as she stood near a fruit stall, a woman approached her. The woman was from a species with soft, silver skin and calm eyes. She asked gently, "Are you the one the human helped?" Myra hesitated, then nodded. The woman gave a small smile. "Then you are fortunate. Hold that kindness close, for such things are rare in this place." Myra thanked her and moved on, holding Ryan's hand tighter. She did not want her son to feel like a story. She wanted him to feel like a child. Yet she could not deny that the kindness of one man had changed more than just their meal. It had changed how people spoke, how they looked, even how they thought. Tomasz, however, seemed untouched by all the noise. He continued his work at the counter, scanning items, greeting customers, and counting credits. His face remained calm, his actions steady. If he noticed the stares or heard the whispers, he gave no sign. To him, each day was the same. But not everyone believed it was only a small act. Above the colony, in chambers hidden behind walls of glass, overseers watched through their monitors. These overseers were not human. They came from older species who had lived long before the colony was built. They studied humans carefully, always searching for patterns. To them, every action was data. One overseer, a tall figure with eyes like molten stone, leaned closer to the screen. "This is not the first time we have seen such behavior. Humans give without reason. They protect those who are not their own. It is not efficient, yet it is consistent." Another overseer tilted her head. "Strange. Most species do not act in this way. They share only when there is gain. Why do humans choose otherwise?" The tall figure replied, "That is what we must learn." Back in the market, Tomasz finished his shift late one evening. He walked home through narrow halls filled with dim lights and the smell of recycled air. He carried a small bag of his own food, no more than he could afford. As he passed a group of merchants, he heard them whisper his name. He kept walking. He had no interest in fame. Yet even he began to notice small changes. Customers greeted him with more warmth. Some smiled where they had once been silent. One old alien even pressed an extra credit into his hand, though Tomasz tried to refuse it. The alien said only, "You have given once. Let me give now." Tomasz accepted quietly, though inside he wondered why such a simple act had stirred so much. To him, helping Myra had been natural. To the colony, it had become something greater. That night, Myra sat with Ryan in their small home. The boy nibbled on a piece of fruit, his eyes shining with joy. He spoke between bites. "Mama, the man at the counter is like the heroes in the stories. He helps people." Myra brushed her hand over his hair. "He is only a man, Ryan. But yes, he helped us. Never forget that kindness exists, even when life is hard." Ryan nodded and smiled. He did not see the weight in his mother's eyes. To him, the world had grown brighter. Meanwhile, the whispers continued to spread. On every level of the colony, from the crowded markets to the quiet halls where overseers studied, the same question began to rise. Why did a human give when survival was so difficult? The story of Tomasz and Myra was no longer just a story of food. It was becoming a story of humanity itself. And though none of them knew it yet, this small act of kindness was only the beginning of something far greater. Far above the crowded marketplace, beyond the voices of merchants and the footsteps of tired workers, the overseers studied the colony. They were hidden in quiet chambers made of clear glass and silver walls. Few even knew they existed. From these high rooms, they could see and record everything that happened below. They had watched humans for many years. When the first groups arrived on the station, the overseers were unsure if humans could survive among other species. Humans were not the strongest. They were not the fastest. Their machines were not as advanced. Yet humans endured. The overseers found that interesting. One screen now replayed a simple moment in the marketplace. A man named Tomasz pressing a button, paying for food he did not need, giving it to a mother and child. The act lasted only seconds, yet the overseers replayed it many times. A tall overseer with glowing eyes leaned forward. There it is again. That choice. He had no reason to do it. No reward, no gain, no contract. Yet he gave. Another overseer, smaller and older, tapped her fingers on the glass. This is not the first time we have seen humans act this way. They risk themselves for strangers. They defend those who are weak. It does not follow logic. The tall one replied, logic is not the only path. Perhaps this is their strength. The others in the chamber murmured. For most species in the galaxy, survival meant taking, storing, and protecting only one's own. Compassion beyond family was rare. To give when one had little was seen as weakness. But humans did it again and again. One overseer pressed a button, opening reports. Records show similar behavior on other colonies. A human gave his last portion of water to a sick worker. Another refused to leave behind a stranger during a storm. Always the same pattern. Sacrifice without promise of return. The older overseer nodded slowly. Yes. And now it happens here. In plain view of many. The whispers grow. Do you not hear them? This small act is already shaping thought among the colony. Below, in the market, the whispers indeed continued. Tomasz stood at his counter, working as always. To him, life had not changed. But around him, more and more customers came not only to buy but to watch. Some greeted him with respect, others with confusion. To many, he seemed ordinary. Yet the story made him something more. Myra felt the change as well. When she walked with Ryan through the aisles, she noticed people staring. A few nodded kindly, while others whispered behind her back. She did not enjoy the attention, but she could not deny what had begun. One act of kindness had grown into a story larger than her own life. Ryan, however, was too young to feel the weight. He smiled each time they passed Tomasz. He tugged at his mother's hand, whispering, "That is the man who helped us." His small voice carried pride, as though Tomasz were a hero from his lessons. One evening, as the market began to close, a group of alien traders gathered near the food stalls. Their voices were sharp and full of debate. "It is dangerous," one said. "If others follow his example, we will all give until we have nothing. That is no way to live." Another shook her head. "Or perhaps it is the only way to truly live. Look how people speak of him. They do not forget. They are inspired." A third snorted. "Inspired does not fill a stomach." Nearby, an elder alien listened in silence. When they asked for his opinion, he spoke softly. "Perhaps humans understand something we do not. Perhaps survival alone is not enough. Perhaps meaning lies in more than credits and trade." His words made the others fall quiet. They did not agree, but they could not dismiss the thought either. Above them, in the overseer's chamber, the debate continued as well. The tall overseer asked, "Should we interfere? Should we stop this story before it grows too large?" The older one shook her head. "No. Let it grow. Let us see how far a single human act can reach. Perhaps it will show us something new." Days passed, and the story did grow. Families began to tell their children about the human cashier who gave away his food. Children repeated it to each other in lessons. Merchants muttered about it while setting up stalls. Even workers in far halls of the station, who never saw the market, spoke of it during their rest. Myra could feel the weight of it every time she stepped outside. She tried to keep her head low, but she could not escape the knowledge that her name and her son's face were now tied to the story. It was Tomasz, of course, who had made the choice. But she and Ryan had become part of it too. One night, as she lay awake listening to the hum of the station walls, Myra wondered what it all meant. Could one man's kindness really matter to so many? She looked at her son sleeping peacefully and thought perhaps it could. Tomasz himself did not change. Each day he rose, walked to the market, and worked. Each day he returned home through the narrow halls with the same quiet steps. But though he lived as if nothing had happened, the colony was shifting around him. The overseers watched closely. They wrote notes, compared records, and measured reactions. They began to see a pattern. Wherever humans lived, stories of sacrifice and kindness followed. Small acts grew into tales, and tales grew into lessons. Humans did not forget such things. The tall overseer finally said, "Perhaps this is why humans endure. Not because they are the strongest. Not because they are the cleverest. But because they inspire each other. One act leads to another. It spreads." The older overseer gave a slow nod. Yes. This Tomasz may think he is only a cashier. But he has already done more. He has given an idea. And ideas can last longer than any supply of food. And so, high above the colony, the watchers kept their eyes on a simple man in a crowded market, knowing his story was only beginning. The days on the colony passed with their usual rhythm until one morning everything changed. A message echoed across the station, carried through speakers in every hall and every market aisle. Supply ships had been delayed. No one knew when they would arrive. For a colony that depended on shipments from distant worlds, this was dangerous news. At first, people did not panic. They believed the delay would be short. But as hours turned to days, the mood in the market shifted. Shelves grew emptier. Prices rose higher. Merchants clutched their supplies tightly, refusing to part with them unless customers paid far more than before. Myra felt the change deeply. She counted her credits again and again, but each time the numbers were too low. Food that had been within reach yesterday was now impossible to buy. She walked past the stalls with Ryan at her side, his small steps slowing when he saw the missing fruit, the bare racks, and the angry faces of hungry customers. "Mama," he whispered, "what will we eat?" Myra forced a smile, though her heart ached. "We will find something, Ryan. Do not worry." But inside, she felt fear growing. In the market, voices rose louder. A scaled merchant shouted at a customer who begged for lower prices. Another merchant locked his stall completely, unwilling to sell at all until he could raise prices further. The sound of arguments filled the air like a storm. Tomasz watched it all from behind his counter. He saw mothers with empty baskets, fathers with tight fists, children with wide, worried eyes. He saw merchants who cared only for their credits. He also saw Myra standing in the crowd, holding Ryan close, her face pale with worry. When Tomasz's shift ended, he carried his small bag of food and walked through the market. Families looked at him with desperation. Some asked if he knew when supplies would arrive. He shook his head. He knew nothing more than they did. But as he passed Myra, he stopped. "You have food?" he asked quietly. Myra shook her head. "Only a little grain. It will not last." Tomasz looked at Ryan, who clung to his mother's hand. He hesitated only for a moment before reaching into his bag. He pulled out a portion of bread and placed it in Myra's hand. "Take it." Myra's eyes widened. "No. You need it for yourself." Tomasz shook his head. "I will manage. Your boy needs it more." She tried to argue, but he pressed the bread firmly into her hand and walked away before she could return it. Ryan looked up at his mother, smiling with relief. "Mama, we can eat tonight." The word of Tomasz's action spread quickly. Once again, whispers filled the air. But this time the whispers were sharper, stronger. Some said he was a fool to give away food when none knew how long the shortage would last. Others said he was brave, that his heart was greater than his hunger. As the days dragged on, the shortage grew worse. Water was rationed. Lines stretched long before stalls that still had supplies. Fear spread like fire through the halls of the station. And yet, Tomasz continued to give. Each day he shared a portion of his food with families who had children. He gave to the weak, to the sick, to those who had nothing left. He never gave with pride or with speeches. He gave quietly, with the same calm face he wore at the counter. Some mocked him. "He will starve," a merchant said with a laugh. "No man can feed others and himself at the same time." But others began to think differently. A worker who had once called him foolish now watched with silent respect. A young woman who had hoarded extra grain secretly gave a bag to her neighbor, whispering, "If the human can give, so can I." The overseers watched from above, their screens glowing with every scene. They saw Tomasz handing bread to a child. They saw Myra looking at him with silent gratitude. They saw the colony split between selfishness and sacrifice. One overseer said, "This is their test. In shortage, most species turn inward, protect only themselves. But look at the human. He gives more when there is less. This is not weakness. This is strength of a different kind." The older overseer nodded. "And it spreads. Others are beginning to follow. A small act becomes many." Myra could feel it too. Each time Tomasz gave, she saw not only his kindness but also the effect on those around him. People began to soften. Not all, but enough. A stranger shared water with her once, saying, "Because he reminded me it is right." One night, when the lights dimmed and the market closed, Myra found Tomasz sitting alone at the counter. She stepped closer, holding Ryan's hand. "Why do you do this?" she asked softly. Tomasz looked at her with calm eyes. "Because survival without compassion is not living. If we only protect ourselves, we lose what makes us human." Myra's heart trembled at his words. She had always thought of survival as enough. But now she began to wonder if there was more. Ryan leaned against the counter, his small voice breaking the silence. "You are a good man." Tomasz smiled faintly. "I am only a man. But we can all choose to be better." Outside, the market was quiet for the night, but the colony was restless. Fear still hung heavy in the air, but hope had begun to flicker as well. A single man's choice had already begun to change the way people thought. And far above, the overseers wrote their notes carefully. They knew this was no longer a simple story of hunger. This was a story of character, of what it meant to be human in the face of hardship. The shortage had now lasted several days, and tension in the colony was growing. The market, once filled with chatter and routine, was now a place of unease. Shelves were bare, the scent of bread and fruit scarce in the air. Families lined up early each morning, hoping for enough to eat before the few remaining supplies ran out completely. Myra held Ryan's hand tightly as they walked past the nearly empty stalls. The boy's face had grown serious. Even in his young mind, he sensed the change. People were no longer friendly. Some argued loudly over the last pieces of food. Others fought quietly over hidden supplies. Myra's heart pounded with fear, but she did her best to stay calm for Ryan. Tomasz stood at his counter, observing the scene. Every day, he gave portions of his own supplies to families with children, to the sick, to those who had no way to survive on their own. Each time he handed over bread or grain, he felt the weight of responsibility, but he did not hesitate. To him, it was simple. No one should go hungry if he could help. Some merchants watched him with anger. "Why does he waste his food?" one snapped. "Soon he will have nothing left for himself." Others began to pause. "Perhaps he sees something we do not," a young trader said quietly. "Notice how people are calmer when he gives. Fear is less." Even the whispers of admiration spread through the colony. Families spoke of him to their children. Workers repeated the story of the human who gave when he had little. And slowly, hope began to appear in small, unnoticed ways. People began to share secretly, following Tamash's example. Above the colony, the overseers monitored every movement. Their screens displayed the market, the families, the lines, and Tomasz himself. One overseer, tall and silent, studied the patterns. "The humans are remarkable," she said. "When threatened, they share. When faced with scarcity, they give. Observe how the axe spreads." Another older overseer nodded. "This is more than survival. This is teaching. Each act inspires another. Each choice shows others a way to live." Back in the market, Myra felt the effects of these small changes. A mother who had been desperate gave a portion of her own water to a stranger when no one was looking. A young boy shared his ration of bread with a friend. The colony was shifting, one small act at a time, without anyone directing it. One evening, as Tomasz handed a portion of food to a small family, a group of overseers appeared in the observation chamber, visible only to those who could see through the monitors. They wanted to speak directly to the citizens. For humans, they had learned, words could guide, but action spoke louder. The overseers began to project a message across the colony, using the station's comm system. Their voices were calm, formal, and unlike any human tone. "Citizens of this colony," they said, "we observe your behavior. You face shortage, yet some choose to act for the good of others. We ask you, who among you demonstrates the greatest example of character?" Many paused, confused. Who would they point to? Merchants who hoarded supplies? Workers who defended only their own families? Or the small human who gave bread and grain to those in need? Slowly, one by one, humans began to answer. "Tomasz," said a young mother. "He gave to my children when we had nothing." "Me too," said a father, holding a small girl's hand. "He helped us survive." Even some aliens spoke, unsure but truthful. "The human shows a way of life we have not seen," said a trader with silver skin. "He gives when it is difficult. That is strength." The overseers listened carefully. Each answer confirmed a pattern they had observed. Humans, when challenged, chose others over themselves. The act of one inspired many. Tomasz, a simple cashier, had become a symbol, not by choice, but by the natural way he lived. Myra, standing with Ryan in the quiet of their small home, heard the messages and saw the change. People were pointing to Tomasz, acknowledging his deeds. Her heart swelled with pride, though she remained humble. He had not acted for praise, only because it was the right thing to do. The overseers projected their final message. This human is an example. Not because he has strength or wealth, but because he acts with care for others. He shows that survival is not only about self, but about the community, about the future, and about hope. Tomasz, unaware of the comm broadcast, continued his work quietly. He handed another portion to a young boy who had nothing left. The child smiled at him with relief and gratitude. Tomasz simply nodded, giving no thought to glory. For him, it was the same as any other day. The colony began to respond differently. Fear of shortage remained, but people no longer acted only for themselves. Small acts of sharing multiplied. Mothers gave a little extra to neighbors. Children helped one another in lines for rations. Workers whispered advice on how to distribute supplies fairly. The atmosphere, though tense, had begun to feel lighter. Myra held Ryan close that night, thinking about what had happened. One man's choice had not only saved their family but had begun to teach the colony something important. She whispered to her son, "See, Ryan. Sometimes one person's heart can change many lives." Ryan looked up, eyes wide with understanding. "Mama," he is a hero. Myra smiled softly. Yes, my son. He shows us what it means to be human. Far above, the overseers observed everything in silence. They had expected strength in power, in speed, in tools. But the human had shown them another kind of strength, a strength born from courage, kindness, and the will to care. Tomasz had passed the test of character, not for himself, but for everyone who had eyes to see. And though he did not know it, his simple act had begun to reshape the colony. The supply ships finally arrived at the colony after days of delay. The air of tension and fear that had hung over the market slowly lifted as crates of food, water, and essential supplies were unloaded. Families lined up with renewed hope, and merchants opened their stalls fully once more. But the real change in the colony was no longer about food. It was about how people acted toward one another. Myra and Ryan walked through the aisles with their small bag of supplies. The boy's face shone with excitement. "Mama, we have enough now," he exclaimed, holding a piece of fruit. Myra smiled and adjusted the strap of their bag. She had more than just food to feel grateful for. The past days had taught her something important about kindness, trust, and community. When they reached Tomasz's counter, they saw him busy as always. He greeted customers quietly, scanning items, handing out their purchases, and accepting credits with the same calm expression he had shown for weeks. Myra watched him, her heart swelling with admiration. The man who had helped them when they had nothing had now become a quiet symbol for the whole colony. Around the market, people spoke differently. They were still concerned about the shortage, but they were no longer selfish. Mothers shared tips about rationing, traders helped children reach food on high shelves, and neighbors offered to carry supplies for each other. Tomasz's small acts of giving had sparked a ripple that transformed the behavior of many. The overseers, high above the market, monitored the colony with quiet attention. They had observed the acts of humans for decades but rarely saw such a concentrated example of character in a single moment. One elder overseer leaned forward, watching the interactions in the market. "This is remarkable," she said. "The humans show strength not in power or speed, but in choice." One simple act inspired many. The taller overseer nodded. "It is the mark of humanity. They survive, yes, but they also give. They care. That is why they endure, why their presence spreads, and why their influence grows." Meanwhile, Myra approached Tomasz with Ryan at her side. She held the bag of supplies tightly, but she wanted more than food. She wanted to thank him properly for what he had done. "Tomasz," she began softly, "we have never had enough words to thank you. You saved us when we had nothing. You gave when no one else would. And more than that, you showed me that hope is real." Tomasz looked at her quietly, his eyes steady. "I did what anyone could do," he said humbly. "We all have the chance to help. I only chose to act." Myra shook her head, tears forming in her eyes. "No, Tomasz. You chose when most would not. You gave when it was hard. That is not something anyone can do easily." Ryan, small and earnest, looked up at Tomasz. "You are a hero," he said plainly. Tomasz smiled faintly at the boy and ruffled his hair. Across the market, whispers continued, but they were no longer about gossip or doubt. People shared stories of giving, of helping each other, and of following Tomasz's example. Even some merchants, who had once scoffed at him, now quietly assisted struggling families. They did not speak openly of him, but their actions mirrored his generosity. That night, Myra tucked Ryan into bed. The boy was unusually quiet, thinking about everything he had seen. "Mama," he asked softly, "why did he help us if he had little too?" Myra sat beside him, brushing his hair from his forehead. "Because he understood something important, Ryan. Survival is not only about keeping food or credits. It is about care, about others, about making the world better. He showed us that being human means thinking of more than yourself." Ryan smiled, finally understanding in his own childlike way. "I want to be like him someday," he whispered. Outside, Tomasz finished his day at the market. The shelves were now full, and customers left with smiles. He did not know that he had become a figure of inspiration across the colony. To him, it was simply another day, another chance to act as he believed was right. Above them, the overseers finally made a decision. They recorded their observations carefully, noting how a single act of human kindness had influenced an entire community. "This is what we were meant to see," said the elder overseer. "Humans are not just survivors. They are teachers. They show strength through compassion, endurance through generosity, and influence through small choices." The taller overseer added, "Tomasz may be just one human among billions, but his example proves the pattern. Humanity's mark is not measured in weapons or wealth. It is measured in character, in courage, and in care." Back on the market floor, Myra stood quietly, watching Tomasz as he served the last customers of the day. She realized that the man's choices had done more than save her family. They had inspired a shift in the colony itself. Fear no longer controlled the citizens completely. Compassion and hope had begun to grow. Ryan tugged at her hand. "Mama, look. Everyone is helping now," he said, pointing to a group of children sharing rations with each other. "They are following him." Myra nodded, smiling. "Yes, Ryan. They are learning what he already knows. They are learning what it means to be human." And so the colony slowly returned to balance. Supplies were plentiful once more, but the true change was deeper than stock or food. Tomasz's actions had left a lasting impact, showing that even in a galaxy of advanced technology and powerful beings, the human heart could make the greatest difference. Myra held her son close that night, feeling safe and grateful. "We were saved not only by food," she whispered, "but by kindness. And we will remember it always." Ryan closed his eyes, dreaming of a world where people helped each other, inspired by one simple cashier who chose to act when no one else did. High above, the overseers recorded the final note in their logs. "Humanity leaves its mark not through force, but through choice. Compassion spreads further than fear, and character lasts longer than survival. This is the way of humans." Tomasz, unaware of the impact he had made across the colony and beyond, returned to his small home that night. He carried nothing but his small bag of food, yet he had given so much more. And in that quiet act, he had shown the galaxy what it truly meant to be human.